Hidden within the meticulous architecture of the biblical canon, nestled between songs of divine romance and prophetic visions of fire, lies a text so thoroughly devastating that the ancient sages actively plotted to erase it from history. According to the Babylonian Talmud, specifically Tractate Shabbat 30b, the rabbinic scholars of the 1st century sought to hide away the Book of Ecclesiastes. They wanted it suppressed, buried, and declared entirely apocryphal. Why? Because its words were deemed dangerously close to heresy. It is a book that looks at the grueling theater of human existence, stares directly into the void of mortality, and concludes that absolutely nothing we do under the sun actually matters. We are culturally conditioned to expect Scripture to offer immediate comfort, a definitive moral compass, or a clean transactional promise that righteous behavior yields divine reward.
Ecclesiastes shatters this comforting illusion with the brutal force of an executioner's axe. It does not speak from the burning bush, nor does it hand down commandments from a trembling, smoke-covered mountain. Instead, it speaks from the suffocating exhaustion of a man who has achieved the absolute pinnacle of human supremacy, only to find the summit entirely barren. The narrator identifies himself using the ancient Hebrew title, Qohelet.
While modern, sanitized translations reduce this magnificent and heavy word to merely the preacher, its true etymology carries the weight of a supreme assembler, a sovereign gatherer of crowds, wisdom, and profound worldly power. Historical and textual tradition points heavily to King Solomon in his twilight years, writing not in the vibrant optimism of his youth, but in the grim, shadow-soaked reality of his inevitable end. Consider the sheer gravity of this author's resume. According to the historical records of 1 Kings, chapter 10, this was a monarch whose baseline annual revenue was exactly 666 talents of gold, an eerie, overwhelming sum that effectively made him the wealthiest human being to ever walk the ancient earth. He built monumental architecture, commanded armies, mastered international trade, and indulged in every conceivable physical, emotional, and intellectual pleasure. He mapped the stars, categorized the beasts of the earth, and possessed a mind so frighteningly expansive that foreign rulers traveled across continents simply to listen to the cadence of his voice. He engineered the ultimate human paradise. And yet, after constructing this impenetrable fortress of wealth and intellect, he stood at the edge of his empire, looked at the undeniable reality of his impending death, and pronounced a terrifying verdict. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. But the English translation is far too sterile. It fails to capture the visceral horror of the original text. The Hebrew word, permanently etched into the opening lines of this ancient scroll, is Hevel. It does not merely mean meaningless in a dry philosophical sense. Hevel translates to a vapor, a wisp of smoke, a fleeting breath exhaled on a freezing winter morning. Imagine standing in a burning room, desperately trying to grab handfuls of smoke to build a foundation. The harder you close your fists, the more violently the smoke slips through your fingers, leaving you with nothing but the smell of ash and the sudden, terrifying realization of your own utter powerlessness. That is the physics of human achievement according to the wisest man who ever lived. It is an inescapable cosmic mechanism where time is the apex predator and humanity is merely the prey. This book forces the reader into a claustrophobic confrontation with the relentless machinery of a fallen world. It strips away the religious platitudes, the shallow modern prosperity doctrines, and the Sunday school reassurances, demanding instead that we look at the raw, unvarnished terror of our own brief mortality. It is a dangerous, haunting investigation into the absolute limits of human comprehension, and understanding its dark corridors is utterly critical for anyone who dares to claim they understand the nature of God and the tragic reality of mankind. If you seek the hidden truths of the ancient world, if you demand to look past the comfortable lies of modern tradition and stare into the abyss of biblical history, subscribe and join us in this investigation. Because the Qohelet did not just observe the futility of life, He documented the exact mathematical certainty of how the universe erases our memory, and he left behind a map detailing the only possible escape from the crushing, cyclical weight of life under the sun. But to read this map, we must first descend into the very darkness that terrified the ancient scholars, a darkness where the righteous die young in agony, where the wicked prosper in palaces, and where the grave waits patiently for both with an open, unforgiving mouth. The modern Western Church has orchestrated a profound and dangerous mutation of biblical theology. We have slowly, over generations, engineered a sanitized, commercially viable interpretation of the divine, reducing the terrifying majesty of the Creator into a cosmic vending machine designed to dispense personal fulfillment, emotional healing, and material prosperity. The modern pulpit echoes with empty guarantees of linear progress, promising that obedience operates as a mechanical lever. Insert righteousness, extract blessing. We are sold a narrative where faith is an impenetrable shield against the erratic cruelty of the natural world, where human suffering is merely a temporary roadblock on the inevitable, well-paved highway to earthly triumph. This is the theology of the comfortable, a philosophy born in air-conditioned auditoriums and broadcasted through glowing screens, far removed from the blood, the dust, and the unrelenting brutality of the ancient world. But Qohelet, speaking from the absolute apex of human achievement in the harsh reality of the ancient Near East, looks at this modern, arrogant optimism and dismantles it with the clinical, merciless precision of an anatomist dissecting a corpse. To understand the sheer magnitude of the devastation this book brings to our comfortable traditions, we must first aggressively strip away our 21st century lenses. We must step back into the geopolitical and spiritual reality of the 10th century BC, an era where the kingdom of Israel under Solomon was not merely a religious concept, but a towering, iron-fisted superpower dominating the trade routes of the Levant. Archaeological excavations at Megiddo, Hazor, and Gezer reveal the massive, fortified infrastructure of a state built on heavy taxation, conscripted labor, and absolute monarchical control. The historical accounts in 1 Kings chapter 9 record that Solomon imposed forced labor on the remnants of the Canaanite populations and drafted 30,000 of his own people to construct his monumental fortifications and the opulent temple in Jerusalem. The economic engine of this golden age was fueled by sweat, broken backs, and the relentless extraction of resources from the earth. The wealth was unfathomable. Ships from Tarshish returned every 3 years carrying gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks, flooding the capital with an unprecedented influx of exotic extravagance. Yet beneath the glittering gold overlays of the temple sanctuary and the massive palaces of Lebanese cedar, the crushing weight of the human condition remained utterly unchanged. In the dark shadows of this immense wealth, Qohelet begins his terrifying autopsy of human endeavor. He introduces a concept that completely sabotages the Western ideal of a fulfilling career, a meaningful legacy, or the pursuit of the American dream. He looks at all the sprawling infrastructure, the accumulated knowledge, and the economic mastery, and he defines it all using the Hebrew word Amal. Modern English Bibles lazily translate this word as labor or work, completely castrating the violent agony embedded in the ancient text. Amal does not mean productive employment. It is a word that bleeds. It signifies a dark, agonizing, bone-crushing exertion, a desperate, exhausting struggle that yields nothing but profound sorrow and a severe vexation of spirit. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 22 and 23, the narrator asks a haunting, paralyzing question. What does a man get for all the Amal and the anxious striving with which he labors under the sun? His days are full of sorrow, his work is a severe grief, and even at night, his anxious mind does not rest. This is the grim physics of human exertion. You expend massive amounts of spiritual and physical kinetic energy, moving the incredibly heavy stones of your ambitions, building your empires, your families, your financial portfolios, and at the exact moment you step back to admire the architecture of your life, the ground shifts, the cosmic clock ticks, and the universe quietly begins the relentless process of turning your monumental achievements back into formless dust. We are taught from childhood to believe that our labor builds a permanent staircase to something greater. We believe in the myth of human progress. But the ancient Near Eastern mind understood a terror that we desperately try to ignore: the terrifying, undefeated indifference of time. The people of the ancient world were surrounded by the crumbling, windswept ruins of empires that came before them. The Sumerians, the Akkadians, the early Egyptian dynasties, all had built monumental structures reaching into the heavens, all had claimed an eternal divine mandate, and all had been swallowed completely by the relentless, expanding sands of the desert. Qohelet taps directly into this profound existential dread, aligning himself not with the triumphant, miraculous historical narratives of Joshua or David, but with the grim, fatalistic wisdom literature of the surrounding pagan nations. Consider the ancient Babylonian text known as the Dialogue of Pessimism, an Akkadian manuscript composed roughly around 1000 BC, contemporary with the Solomonic era. In this ancient text, a master and his slave debate the value of various human actions: loving a woman, offering sacrifices to the gods, leading a violent rebellion, only to conclude repeatedly that every single action is ultimately futile, ending with the grim observation that the only logical conclusion to the human experiment is death. The Egyptian Song of the Harper, found deeply inscribed on the walls of ancient, forgotten tombs, echoes the exact same haunting melody, mourning the dark fact that the great builders of the past are gone, their houses destroyed, and their memories erased from the earth as if they had never existed. Yet, Qohelet does not merely echo this ancient pagan despair. He elevates it into a terrifying divine revelation, weaving the absolute terror of human insignificance into the very fabric of biblical theology. In the opening chapter of Ecclesiastes, verses 4 through 9, he constructs a suffocating, inescapable mechanism, describing the entire universe as a massive closed-loop machine. A generation goes, and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun sets, and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south, turns to the north, round and round it goes. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. This is not a beautiful, poetic celebration of nature. It is the architectural blueprint of a cosmic prison. Qohelet looks at the fundamental laws of thermodynamics centuries before modern physics could define them, observing that the universe is locked in an endless, terrifying cycle of motion that produces absolutely no net progress. The massive, heavy gears of the world grind perpetually, crushing human generations between their iron teeth, spinning wildly, generating incredible heat and noise, yet remaining exactly in the same place. There is nothing new under the sun. Every astonishing technological advancement, every violent political revolution, every brilliant philosophical awakening is merely a forgotten echo of a past cycle, doomed to be completely forgotten again by the generations that will inevitably follow. Humanity suffers from a terminal, incurable collective amnesia. This cyclical prison obliterates the most cherished and deeply rooted theological doctrine of the ancient Israelites, the Deuteronomic formula of retribution theology. For centuries, the religious establishment operated on a strict, contractual understanding of God's justice. The Book of Deuteronomy clearly outlined the terms of this divine covenant. If you obey the commandments, you will experience agricultural prosperity, military dominance, and a long, healthy life. If you disobey, you will be cursed with severe famine, horrific disease, and the devastating, unforgiving blade of your enemies. It was a neat, orderly, and highly predictable universe. It allowed the religious elite to look at a wealthy, healthy man and comfortably declare him righteous, and to look at a suffering, impoverished man and confidently declare him cursed by God. It was a theology that provided the comforting illusion of control, suggesting that human morality directly held the steering wheel of the cosmos. But the author of Ecclesiastes takes this deeply comforting, traditional doctrine, drags it into the unforgiving light of cold reality, and systematically shatters it into jagged, irreconcilable pieces. He forces the reader to look directly at the horrifying anomalies that the traditional religious establishment desperately tried to ignore or explain away. In Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 15, the narrator delivers a blow that must have sent absolute shockwaves through the rabbinical academies of antiquity. He states, "In this meaningless life of mine I have seen both of these, the righteous perishing in their righteousness, and the wicked living long in their wickedness." This single, devastating sentence is an act of violent theological vandalism against the sanitized dogmas of his time and ours. It is an open acknowledgement of a dark, terrifying glitch in the matrix of divine justice. Qohelet deeply observes the architecture of human society and sees a grim, chaotic courtroom where the guilty are consistently and openly pardoned, where the innocent are routinely and brutally executed, and where the supreme judge remains completely, deafeningly silent. He points to the corrupt judges taking bribes in the tribunals, the innocent blood spilled in the dusty streets, and the ruthless, violent men who sleep soundly in their luxurious beds, completely undisturbed by the wrath of God. He sees the bloodthirsty tyrant dying peacefully in old age, surrounded by immense wealth and honor, while the faithful, uncompromising prophet is stoned to death in a ditch, his broken body left exposed to the scavenging birds of the air. The terror deepens significantly as we realize this is not merely a cynical observation of human corruption. Qohelet attributes this horrifying randomness directly to the sovereign architecture of the world under the sun. In Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 11, he delivers what is perhaps the most frightening existential observation in the entire biblical canon. "I have seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise or wealth to the brilliant or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all." Let the absolute freezing dread of that statement sink deeply into your bones. The ancient Hebrew text uses the word Pega, a terrifying, violent term that means a sudden, violently unexpected occurrence, a catastrophic impact, a disastrous collision out of nowhere. It is the horrific realization that absolutely no amount of physical preparation, intellectual brilliance, or even strict moral purity can shield you from the sudden, catastrophic ambush of tragedy. You can build the most heavily fortified, heavily guarded fortress of personal virtue and financial stability. You can pray exactly the right prayers at exactly the right times. You can observe all the right rituals, and yet, a microscopic anomaly in your bloodstream, a momentary distraction by a drunk driver on a dark road, or the sudden shifting of geopolitical tectonic plates can obliterate your entire existence in a single afternoon. We are desperately, fundamentally terrified of this uncontrollable chaos. And so, we invent complex, comforting theological formulas to explain it away. We claim the righteous man died young because God needed another angel in heaven, or because it was a hidden blessing in disguise, or we secretly blame hidden sins to protect the fragile illusion of a fair mechanical universe. Qohelet flatly refuses to engage in these cowardly, intellectually dishonest mental gymnastics. He stands tall in the smoking ruins of our broken theology and forces us to confront the terrifying fact that God is not a cosmic bellhop, and he is under absolutely no contractual obligation to reward our perceived goodness with earthly safety. The Almighty governs a universe so incomprehensibly vast, so incredibly complex, and operating on a timescale so infinitely terrifying that our fragile human concepts of fairness and timely justice are entirely irrelevant. The Creator moves the massive, heavy pieces on the chessboard of eternity, and in the process, pawns are sacrificed, knights fall, and entire human generations are swept off the board into the dark, silent void of the grave. And through all this relentless destruction, the human heart screams loudly for an explanation, demanding to know the reason behind the suffering, demanding a peek behind the impenetrable iron curtain of divine providence. But the heavens remain dark, silent, and sealed, Let us dig even deeper into the historical bedrock of this revelation. The author, operating under the heavy, magnificent mantle of the Solomonic persona, does not write as a sequestered monk or an isolated ascetic who simply rejected the material world because he lacked the strength or intellect to conquer it. The absolute terror of Ecclesiastes is that it is written by the man who won the game. He held the supreme high score of human existence. The historical reality of the United Monarchy period in ancient Israel was a time of unprecedented, explosive infrastructural growth. The copper mines in the Araba Valley were running at maximum capacity, sweating and smelting the bronze that would forge the weapons of the army and the massive pillars of the temple. The taxation districts were strictly, ruthlessly organized, siphoning the rich agricultural yield of the Fertile Crescent directly into the royal storehouses. According to the ancient historical records, the king's daily provision was 30 cors of fine flour and 60 cors of meal, 10 fattened oxen, 20 pasture-fed cattle, and 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and specially fattened fowl. This is an empire operating at a gluttonous, almost grotesque scale of daily consumption. It is an economic leviathan, breathing fire, devouring the labor of thousands upon thousands of men, just to sustain the unimaginable opulence of a single royal court. The Queen of Sheba, traveling months from the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, arrived in Jerusalem carrying 120 talents of gold and an abundance of exotic spices, expecting to meet a mere mortal king. Instead, the ancient texts record that when she saw the unbelievable architecture of his house, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their magnificent robes, and the immense bloody burnt offerings he made at the temple, there was literally no more breath in her. She was physically and psychologically overwhelmed by the sheer, crushing gravity of his power and intellect. He had entirely conquered the material world. He had bent the natural elements to his absolute will. He planted sprawling vineyards, engineered massive, complex irrigation pools to water vast forests of growing trees, acquired thousands of male and female slaves, amassed flocks and herds larger than anyone who had ever lived in Jerusalem before him. He collected legendary singers, master musicians, and the ultimate forbidden delight of ancient mortal men, a sprawling harem of 1,000 women. He was the undisputed sovereign master of every sensory, intellectual, and physical domain available under the sun. He essentially conducted a grand, exhaustive, multi-decade experiment on the human soul, pouring infinite resources into a bottomless cup to see if the human spirit could ever truly be satisfied. And the final result of this ultimate, uninhibited, empirical study? An echoing, terrifying emptiness. When he finally reaches the absolute zenith of power, he does not find spiritual enlightenment. He finds a horrifying, suffocating vacuum. He introduces another heavy, crushing Hebrew phrase into his autopsy, ra'ut ruach, translated often in modern texts as a chasing after the wind. But once again, the English completely fails to capture the violence. It is not a playful pursuit of a gentle summer breeze. It implies a violent, agonizing herding of the wind, attempting to corral a massive hurricane, desperately trying to build an iron cage for a tornado. It is an exercise in absolute, humiliating futility. It is the devastating realization that the human soul has been cursed with an infinite, divine appetite, but has been trapped entirely inside a finite, decaying universe. We are brilliantly designed to consume, to conquer, to build, to know. But the material world simply does not contain the necessary caloric density to keep our eternal spirits alive. We are starving to death at a magnificent royal banquet, eating handfuls of beautiful sand while desperately convincing ourselves it is a feast. The traditional religious minds of the era, the priests operating the bloody altars in the temple courts directly below the king's palace, genuinely believed that maintaining the rigorous sacrificial system, keeping the strict laws of Leviticus, and ensuring the ritual purity of the nation was the ultimate, fulfilling goal of existence. They believed they were literally maintaining the cosmic order through their actions. But Qohelet looks down from his high, cedar-lined windows at the endless streams of animal blood flowing from the brass altars, the thick smoke rising into the silent sky, and the millions of people desperately trying to balance their moral ledgers with a holy, terrifying God. And he realizes that the legalistic, mechanical religion of his contemporaries is just another desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable. It is another vanity, another violent chasing of the wind. Even the accumulation of religious wisdom, the rigorous pursuit of complex theological knowledge, the very act of studying the ancient scrolls and unraveling the mysteries of the cosmos, is ultimately declared spiritually bankrupt. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who dramatically increases knowledge only increases his own profound sorrow. The more you understand the hidden architecture of this fallen world, the more you see the massive, irreparable cracks in the foundation. The more you meticulously study the anatomy of the human heart, the more you realize it is fundamentally, incurably diseased. This is the devastating, uncompromising deconstruction of human tradition. Qohelet strips away the comforting illusions of economic stability, the naive, childish promises of retribution theology, the arrogant belief in human progress, and the false security of mechanical, ritualistic religion. He forces us out of the warm, brightly illuminated halls of our modern megachurches and violently drags us into the freezing, dark wilderness of ancient reality. He forces us to stand directly at the edge of the open grave, to look down into the cold earth, and acknowledge that the absolute greatest achievements of humanity, the towering steel skyscrapers, the brilliant symphonies, the massive financial empires, and the most meticulously constructed religious traditions, will all eventually be swallowed by the exact same dirt that claims the decaying bodies of the fool and the beast. He forces us to realize that under the sun, we are entirely trapped in a sealed, suffocating room. The oxygen is slowly but surely running out, and absolutely no amount of human ingenuity, hoarded wealth, or even flawless moral perfection can forge a key to unlock the heavy iron door. The ancient traditions lied to us. The modern pulpits lie to us. The universe is fundamentally broken. The cosmic clock is relentlessly ticking, and a dark, heavy shadow is slowly creeping across the sprawling empire of mankind, moving relentlessly toward a final, inevitable blackout. To understand the sheer, terrifying scale of the trap humanity finds itself in, we must step inside the very machinery of the cosmos that the author meticulously dissects. The third chapter of Ecclesiastes opens with a sequence of verses so universally famous that they have been hijacked by modern pop culture, turned into gentle folk songs, and read at comforting memorial services. But to the ancient Near Eastern mind, this was not a beautiful poetic reflection on the changing of the seasons. It was the architectural blueprint of an inescapable, deterministic nightmare. It is the rhythmic, metallic grinding of a universe operating entirely independent of human will. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up. Read through the lens of ancient Hebrew theology. This is a horrifying manifesto of absolute fatalism. The text utilizes two specific Hebrew words for time: zeman, indicating a fixed, appointed season, and eth, meaning a specific, predetermined moment of occurrence. Qohelet is not suggesting that humans should wisely choose the right time to act. He is stating, with the cold precision of an astronomer tracking the trajectory of a dead comet, that these moments are violently forced upon us. You do not choose your moment of birth, nor do you negotiate your moment of death. The time to kill and the time to heal are presented as cosmic mandates, heavy, invisible pendulum swings that sweep across human history, causing empires to rise in brutal violence and collapse in sudden ruin, regardless of the prayers, the diplomacy, or the moral outrage of the people being crushed beneath the gears. We are not the operators of this massive clockwork. We are merely the fragile, grinding teeth on the cogs, wearing down with every passing generation until we snap and are replaced by the next. But the true, unparalleled psychological horror of Ecclesiastes is not simply that we are trapped in this mechanical cycle. If we were merely animals, beasts of the field driven only by biological instinct, the relentless ticking of this cosmic clock would not torture us. A lion does not experience existential dread over the collapse of a dynasty, and an ox does not weep over the concept of infinity. The supreme cruelty of the human condition, the ultimate divine paradox, is explicitly detailed in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. The author writes that the Creator has made everything beautiful in its time, but then he delivers a devastating theological blow. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. To fully grasp the magnitude of this curse, we must look at the ancient Hebrew word used here for eternity, Olam. This is not merely a measurement of infinite time.
In the ancient Semitic worldview, Olam represents the vast hidden horizon, the vanishing point of antiquity, and the uncharted darkness of the absolute future. It is the realm of the divine, a state of existence entirely outside the suffocating boundaries of the sun, the moon, and the decaying earth.
And according to the wisest man who ever lived, God deliberately took a fragment of this infinite, boundless reality and violently, surgically implanted it directly into the fragile, decaying hardware of the human mind. Imagine the sheer agony of this design. We are finite, mortal creatures, slowly rotting away from the moment we take our first breath, confined to a tiny, agonizingly brief window of time on a hostile rock in a terrifyingly silent universe. Yet, programmed into our very core is the software of the immortal. We possess the crushing capacity to conceptualize forever. We can mentally visualize 1,000 years into the future. We can construct towering philosophies about the nature of the infinite. We can aggressively love another human being with a ferocity that demands eternal continuity. Our minds are brilliantly designed to swim in the fathomless, deep ocean of the eternal. But we are trapped inside a biological cage that is aggressively evaporating. We are infinite ghosts, chained to dying animals. We desperately try to solve the massive, complex equation of the universe, but God has deliberately hidden the variables. We can feel the presence of the grand design. We can sense the invisible architecture of eternity pressing against our skin, but we are absolutely forbidden from understanding it. We are given enough divine light to realize we are trapped in the dark, but not enough to actually find the door. This unbearable tension between our eternal programming and our mortal decay was heavily studied by the radical ascetic sects of antiquity. In the scorching, desolate wasteland of the Judean desert, hidden in the jagged cliffs towering over the Dead Sea, archaeologists made the most important manuscript discovery of the 20th century. Within the dark, guano-filled caverns of Qumran, among the legendary Dead Sea Scrolls, researchers uncovered fragile, deteriorating fragments of Ecclesiastes in Cave 4, categorized as 4 Kukikuha. These fragments, written in a beautiful, meticulous Herodian script, prove that the Essenes, an apocalyptic, hyper-legalistic sect obsessed with angelic warfare, demonic entities, and the impending end of the world, were actively copying and studying this grim text. Why would a radical sect waiting for the flaming swords of the archangels care about the fatalistic despair of a wealthy, depressed king? Because the Essenes intimately understood the mechanism of the curse. They read the Book of Enoch, particularly the Book of the Luminaries, which describes in terrifying, hyper-specific detail how the great archangel Uriel manages the massive, unyielding portals of the sun, the moon, and the stars. They understood that the physical universe is an inescapable, heavily guarded prison of time. Qohelet, standing in his palace in Jerusalem hundreds of years earlier, looked up at those exact same luminaries and did not see the angels. He only saw the cold, unforgiving bars of the prison. The men of Qumran read Ecclesiastes and recognized the exact symptoms of a world deeply infected by the fall, a world heavily managed by forces completely indifferent to human suffering. And it is this observation of profound, systemic suffering that pushes the investigation into an even darker, more sinister territory. Qohelet moves his gaze from the unstoppable, terrifying machinery of the cosmos down into the dusty, blood-soaked streets of human civilization. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 1, the narrative tone shifts from philosophical detachment to visceral, nauseating horror. He records, "Again I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter." The Hebrew root used here for oppression is ashak, a violent, crushing word that implies extortion, severe exploitation, and the merciless grinding destruction of the weak by the strong. It is the sound of bones breaking beneath the wheels of an empire. But to the ancient theological mind, this was not merely a sociological observation about corrupt politicians or greedy merchants. In the broader context of the ancient Near East and the unseen realm detailed throughout the scriptures, systemic, crushing human oppression is the direct fingerprint of hostile divine entities. The ancient Israelites did not view the nations surrounding them as merely political rivals. They viewed them as territories governed by dark, territorial principalities. Psalm 82 pulls back the veil on the divine council, describing the terrifying reality of spiritual beings who were assigned to govern the nations, but became profoundly corrupt, ruling with heavy injustice, favoring the wicked, and plunging the foundations of the earth into absolute darkness. The massive, towering ziggurats of Babylon, the sprawling, colossal temples of Egypt, and the dark, blood-stained altars of Canaan were not just architectural wonders. They were the physical extraction points where these fallen entities harvested the pain, the terror, and the Amal, the agonizing labor, of humanity. When Qohelet looks at the tears of the oppressed and repeatedly states that they have absolutely no comforter, he is staring directly into the terrifying void created by the silence of heaven. He sees the massive, invisible, spiritual architecture of a world occupied by hostile forces. The power is entirely on the side of the oppressors, both physical and spiritual. The wealthy elite crush the poor in the courts. The massive armies slaughter the innocent in the fields. And behind them, the dark, unseen rulers of the age pull the strings, feeding on the despair of a fractured humanity. The repetition of the phrase, "They have no comforter," is a horrific echo chamber. Where is the booming voice from Sinai? Where are the plagues of Egypt? Where is the miraculous intervention of the Exodus? From the vantage point of Ecclesiastes, the sky is made of brass. The oppressed cry out, their tears fall into the indifferent dust, and the universe simply continues its cold, mechanical rotation. This realization pushes the author to a psychological breaking point so extreme that it borders on absolute nihilism. In the very next verses of chapter 4, he declares that the dead, who have already died, are far happier than the living, who are still alive. But then he goes even further, plunging into the darkest theological abyss in the entire canon. He states that better than both of them is the one who has never been born, who has never seen the evil that is done under the sun. This is an incredibly dangerous, almost radioactive statement. He is directly attacking the foundational Genesis mandate. In the beginning, God created life, looked at the sprawling biological reality of the earth, and declared it very good. The mandate was to be fruitful and multiply. But Qohelet, standing amid the wreckage of human history, looks at the terrifying volume of pain, the rampant injustice, and the suffocating lack of meaning, and calculates that non-existence is mathematically and spiritually superior to the curse of consciousness. He repeats this terrifying anomaly in chapter 6, describing a man who fathers 100 children and lives 2,000 years. But if his soul is not satisfied with goodness, Qohelet declares that a lifeless, aborted, stillborn child is better off than he. The stillborn comes into the world in total darkness and departs in absolute silence. Its name is covered in darkness, it never sees the sun or knows anything. Yet it finds more rest than the man who lives 2 millennia of hollow, agonizing vanity. This horrific calculation forces us to confront the ultimate terror of the ancient world, the terrifying equalizer of the grave. The modern mind softens the concept of death with bright visions of pearly gates, choirs of angels, and an immediate transition into a paradise of light. But we must aggressively strip away these later theological revelations to understand the sheer dread pulsing through the veins of Ecclesiastes. For the ancient Israelite living before the resurrection of Christ, the afterlife was not a kingdom of light, it was Sheol.
Sheol was the terrifying, shadowy underworld, the pit, the great, silent cavern deep beneath the foundations of the mountains. It was not a place of active, burning torture like the medieval concept of hell, which in many ways is less frightening because it at least implies some form of continued active consciousness. Sheol was the realm of the Rephaim, the shadowy, weakened shades of the dead who exist in a terrifying state of lethargic paralysis. Archaeological excavations of First Temple period Judean bench tombs vividly illustrate this grim reality. When an ancient Israelite died, their body was laid out on a cold stone bench carved directly into the bedrock of a dark cave. They were left there to rot, their flesh devoured by time and decay, until only the dry bones remained. Then the family would return, collect the dry bones, and unceremoniously sweep them into a repository pit beneath the bench, directly mingling the remains with the chaotic pile of bones from generations of ancestors. You were literally, physically gathered to your fathers in the dark. The surrounding Canaanite cultures personified this terror in the form of Mot, the terrifying god of death, the supreme enemy of Baal. Mot was depicted as a monstrous entity with a throat so unimaginably massive that his lower lip dragged along the earth while his upper lip scraped the heavens, wandering the desert and swallowing humanity whole, insatiable and completely unstoppable. The ancient Israelites stripped away the mythological narrative of the Canaanites, but they retained the horrifyingly bleak reality of the grave's appetite. Qohelet looks down into this dark, dusty repository of human remains and delivers a verdict that obliterates any desperate hope for post-mortem earthly influence. In chapter 9, verse 5, the words drop like heavy stones onto a wooden coffin. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know absolutely nothing. They have no further reward, and even their name is entirely forgotten. Their love, their hate, and their intense jealousy have long since vanished. Never again will they have a part in anything that happens under the sun. This is the absolute, terrifying zero point of human existence. The great conqueror who burned cities to the ground, the brilliant philosopher who unlocked the mysteries of mathematics, the beautiful queen who commanded the obsession of thousands, and the illiterate, starving slave who died covered in sores, they all descend into the exact same dark, silent cavern. The intense, violent emotions that drove their earthly lives, the raging jealousies that started wars, the desperate loves that built empires, the burning hatreds that spanned generations, all of it is instantly and permanently extinguished the moment the brain ceases to function. The universe does not mourn their passing. The massive, indifferent gears of time simply continue to turn. The sun rises on the morning of your funeral, the markets open, people laugh in the streets, and the relentless, suffocating amnesia of history immediately begins the rapid process of erasing your entire existence. There is no secret knowledge in the grave. There is no grand, enlightening revelation waiting in the dust. The dead know nothing. They are locked in a terrifying, silent paralysis, stripped of all power, all memory, and all identity, waiting in the crushing darkness of Sheol, while the chaotic, violent world under the sun continues to boil above them. The terror of this profound, suffocating darkness did not go unnoticed by the ancient guardians of the faith. We often imagine the compilation of the biblical canon as a peaceful, harmonious assembly of holy men, quietly nodding in agreement as the Spirit of God gently guided their pens. The historical reality is vastly more volatile, steeped in fierce, agonizing theological warfare. In the late 1st century, roughly around the year 90 of the Common Era, the spiritual landscape of Judea was in absolute, apocalyptic ruins. The massive stone blocks of the Second Temple in Jerusalem had been violently cast down by the Roman legions under Titus.
The gold had been stripped from the altars, the Holy of Holies had been desecrated, and the blood of the priesthood had literally flowed down the steps of the sanctuary. The Jewish identity was facing total, catastrophic erasure. In a desperate bid to preserve the remnants of their faith, the surviving rabbinic scholars fled to the coastal city of Yavne, known in Greek as Jamnia. There, amidst the psychological trauma of a destroyed civilization, they convened an emergency council to solidify exactly which ancient scrolls contained the divine breath of God, and which scrolls needed to be locked away in the dark. It was in this tense, heavily burdened atmosphere that the Book of Ecclesiastes became the center of a furious, almost violent, doctrinal battle. According to the ancient records preserved in the Mishnah, specifically Tractate Yadayim, chapter 3, the academies of the two greatest sages, the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai, clashed fiercely over the spiritual contamination of Qohelet's words. The debate centered on a terrifyingly specific rabbinic concept: whether or not a book defiles the hands. In the complex, inverted logic of ancient ritual purity, a text that was supremely holy, a text that actively contained the terrifying radioactive presence of the divine, transferred a state of ritual impurity to the hands of the human who dared to touch the parchment. It was a physical acknowledgement that mortal flesh cannot casually interact with the raw fire of God's revelation without undergoing a fundamental, alarming shift in status. The school of Shammai, representing the strict, uncompromising theological hardliners, looked at the crushing fatalism, the apparent contradictions, and the dark, borderline nihilistic conclusions of Ecclesiastes, and they flatly declared that it did not defile the hands. They argued it was merely the depressing, uninspired philosophy of a disillusioned king, a dangerous piece of secular pessimism that had no place next to the blazing, miraculous triumphs of the Torah. The panic of the religious elite was entirely justified, because Ecclesiastes introduces a lethal, highly contagious pathogen into the meticulously organized immune system of traditional theology. The religious authorities had spent centuries building a massive, intricate fortress of moral cause and effect. They had mapped the spiritual universe with precise, rigid coordinates. Do this, and you will live. Touch that, and you will die. The Book of Proverbs, written in the bright, optimistic morning of the Solomonic era, served as the ultimate operating manual for this mechanical universe. Proverbs confidently declared that the righteous are delivered from trouble, that the fear of the Lord prolongs life, and that the years of the wicked will be aggressively cut short. It presented a world where divine justice was an active, measurable currency. But Ecclesiastes, written in the freezing twilight of that exact same royal intellect, acts as a violent sledgehammer taken directly to the foundational pillars of Proverbs. Qohelet does not merely question the traditional doctrines, he actively weaponizes them against the reader. In Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 16 and 17, he issues a command so utterly bewildering, so entirely contrary to every religious instinct programmed into the human psyche, that early commentators desperately tried to translate their way out of its implications. The ancient text reads, "Do not be overly righteous, and do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Do not be overly wicked, and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time?" To the modern, sanitized religious mind, this sounds like a terrifying compromise, a cowardly plea for spiritual mediocrity. We are taught to pursue absolute holiness, to hunger and thirst for righteousness, to scale the highest mountains of moral perfection. Yet here, the supreme architect of biblical wisdom looks at the zealous, bleeding ascetic, the man tearing his own flesh to achieve spiritual purity, and tells him to stop, warning him that his aggressive pursuit of perfection is actually a mechanism of self-destruction. The Hebrew word used here for destroy is tishomem, which carries the chilling connotation of being left absolutely desolate, stunned into a state of catatonic shock, completely ruined and isolated. This is the hidden, agonizing paradox of the doctrine. Qohelet has deeply observed the grim mechanics of the world under the sun,
and he realizes that the universe operates with a terrifying, indifferent friction. If you attempt to live as a perfectly righteous being in a fundamentally broken, profoundly corrupt system, the system will not reward you. It will recognize you as a foreign, incompatible object and violently grind you down to dust.
The man who refuses to compromise, who rigidly holds to absolute divine standards in a world governed by cutthroat survival and shadowed by demonic principalities, will find himself isolated, impoverished, and eventually annihilated by the sheer, crushing weight of human malice. History is heavily stained with the blood of martyrs who proved this exact equation. Their immense righteousness did not activate a divine shield. It activated the executioner's blade. Conversely, he warns against descending into absolute wickedness and folly, because the natural, mechanical laws of society will eventually trigger a violent, retaliatory correction. The ruthless tyrant and the chaotic fool will inevitably stumble into a fatal error, triggering their own premature demise. Therefore, Qohelet forces the reader onto a terrifying, razor-thin tightrope suspended over a bottomless abyss. You must navigate the agonizing tension of living in a fallen world without being entirely consumed by its darkness, while simultaneously abandoning the childish, arrogant illusion that your personal morality functions as a magical talisman against tragedy. This leads directly into the ultimate, devastating conclusion regarding human intellect. We inherently believe that if we just gather enough data, if we study the ancient manuscripts long enough, if we crack the intricate codes of quantum mechanics or theology, we can finally understand the mind of God. We believe that ignorance is merely a temporary condition waiting to be cured by human effort. But Ecclesiastes categorically destroys this epistemological arrogance. The pursuit of ultimate truth is not presented as a noble, liberating journey. It is presented as a divine instrument of psychological torture. In Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 13, the author describes this pursuit using a phrase that chills the blood when read in its original context. He states, "I applied my heart to inquire and to explore by wisdom concerning all that is done under the heavens." But then he immediately delivers the crushing verdict. It is a grievous task that God has given to the children of men to be afflicted with. The English translations completely fail to convey the violence of the original Hebrew. The phrase is Inyan Ra. It does not mean a difficult job or a challenging puzzle. It translates literally to an evil, malignant affliction, a severe, agonizing trauma inflicted directly by the Creator. God has deliberately hardwired the human soul with a burning, insatiable desperation to understand the meaning of life, and He has simultaneously deliberately locked the universe inside an impenetrable iron vault, throwing away the key into the dark abyss of eternity. We are forced to play a massive high-stakes game of cosmic chess where the opponent is invisible, the rules are constantly changing, and we are not even allowed to see the entire board. We aggressively study the pieces, we track the movements of the stars, we analyze the shifting tectonic plates of geopolitics, and we construct massive, intricate theological systems to explain why certain pawns are sacrificed while others advance. But in Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verses 16 and 17, Qohelet finally hits the absolute, impenetrable bedrock of human limitation. He writes, "When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe the labor that is done on earth, people getting no sleep day or night, then I saw all that God has done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all their efforts to search it out, no one can discover its meaning. Even if the wise claim they know, they cannot really comprehend it." Picture the visceral reality of this scene. This is not a casual observation. This is the confession of a man who has pushed the human brain to the absolute limits of its processing power. He describes the agonizing physical toll of this investigation: the bloodshot eyes, the vibrating anxiety, the total deprivation of sleep day and night. He has stared into the screaming void of human suffering. He has meticulously tracked the terrifying, random distribution of wealth and tragedy, and he has desperately tried to map it back to a logical, compassionate Creator. and after exhausting the vast, unlimited resources of the greatest empire on earth, he collapses in the dark, finally realizing that the architecture of God's providence is entirely, permanently encrypted. The ancient Hebrew root used for what God has done is asa. It signifies the sovereign, active, heavy manufacturing of reality. God is actively forging the events of the universe, but the mechanics of this forge are blindingly hot and completely invisible to the mortal eye. This is a devastating, lethal blow to the modern religious ego. We live in an era overflowing with arrogant theologians, loud prophetic voices on glowing stages, and self-appointed spiritual gurus who confidently claim to know the exact will of God. They boldly declare why a specific earthquake happened, why a particular nation was invaded, or why a devastating disease struck a specific family. They aggressively market their supposed insider knowledge of the divine courtroom, selling cheap, digestible answers to a desperate, grieving congregation. Qohelet looks across the millennia at these confident, smiling charlatans and calls them exactly what they are: liars. He states with absolute, terrifying finality that even if a wise man, even if the most anointed, rigorously trained, deeply spiritual human being on earth claims to have figured out the grand design, he is entirely deceiving himself. The human mind simply does not possess the structural integrity to hold the raw, unfiltered radiation of God's sovereign logic. If we were actually allowed to see the incomprehensibly vast, terrifyingly complex web of cosmic cause and effect, if we were allowed to see how the brutal death of an innocent man in the ancient world directly calibrates the trajectory of a falling star 10,000 years in the future, our fragile biological minds would instantly shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The silence of God, the impenetrable mystery of his actions, is not a sign of his absence. It is the heavy, dark shielding of a nuclear reactor, actively preventing the radioactive glory of his absolute sovereignty from completely incinerating our fragile consciousness. This forces the investigative mind into a terrifying, claustrophobic corner. If absolute righteousness is a guarantee of earthly destruction, and absolute wisdom is a divine mechanism of psychological torture, and the true meaning of the universe is permanently locked away in the mind of an unsearchable God, what is left for the fragile, terrified human standing in the dark? The early Christian church struggled violently with this very question. In the early centuries of the faith, as the church expanded into the Hellenistic world, they encountered the massive, seductive philosophies of the Epicureans and the Stoics. The Epicureans argued that the gods existed, but they were entirely indifferent to the suffering of humanity. They believed the universe was just a chaotic collision of atoms, and therefore, the only logical pursuit was the maximization of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. When the Greek philosophers read the Greek Septuagint translation of Ecclesiastes, they were stunned. They thought they had found a biblical ally, a Jewish king who had effectively surrendered to nihilism. The early church fathers, terrified by this alignment, went to extraordinary lengths to aggressively spiritualize the dark text of Qohelet. Saint Jerome, writing his extensive commentaries in the late 4th century, desperately tried to soften the blows of Ecclesiastes. He argued that when the text declared all earthly things to be vanity, it was merely an allegorical tool designed exclusively to force the believer to look toward the heavenly spiritual realm. The ascetic monks of the Egyptian desert weaponized the book to justify their extreme isolation, using it as a manual for entirely rejecting the material world, fleeing into the scorching sand to escape the meaningless cycle of human civilization. But to spiritualize Ecclesiastes in this manner is to actively betray the raw, bleeding reality of the text. Qohelet is not merely setting up a cheap rhetorical contrast between a bad earth and a good heaven. He is making a terrifying ontological claim about the nature of the physical universe as it currently exists under the curse of the fall. He is pointing out that the material world is not an illusion, nor is it something we can simply ignore by meditating on angels. The sun beating down on the back of the slave is real. The cold stone of the tomb is real. The violent, sudden arrival of death is the most real, undeniable fact of existence. And the deepest, most terrifying doctrinal paradox of all is that this agonizing, broken, utterly futile reality is exactly the environment God intentionally designed for us to inhabit during our brief, flashing moment of consciousness. The hidden battle is not a triumphant cinematic clash of swords against visible demonic entities. The true, exhausting spiritual warfare detailed in Ecclesiastes is the daily, grinding, agonizing struggle to wake up in a universe that absolutely refuses to explain itself. It is the terrifying discipline of looking directly at the violent, chaotic absurdity of life, the cancer wards, the collapsing economies, the sudden accidents that erase entire families, and refusing to invent a comfortable, fake theological bandage to cover the gaping wound. It is the grueling mental endurance required to stand in the freezing rain of an indifferent world, knowing that your good deeds will likely be forgotten, your accumulated wealth will be scattered to strangers, your immense intellect will eventually decay into senility or dust, and yet actively choosing to move forward without surrendering to absolute madness. The Hebrew text refers to this creeping existential insanity as sikluth. It is not the clinical chemical imbalance of the brain. It is the deep spiritual madness that infects the soul when a human being finally realizes they are entirely powerless against the crushing momentum of time and the terrifying sovereignty of God. When a man stares too long into the vast, silent void of the heavens and realizes that his life is merely a vapor, a wisp of smoke vanishing into the dark, the natural default human reaction is to descend into the violent, erratic behavior of the damned. We see it in the frantic, hedonistic panic of modern society, the desperate screaming obsession with extending youth, the psychotic accumulation of digital wealth, the aggressive, numbing consumption of entertainment. All of it is just the terrified thrashing of inmates locked on death row, desperately trying to drown out the heavy, rhythmic sound of the executioner sharpening his axe in the courtyard. Qohelet walked through this exact valley of madness. He drank the poisonous waters of existential dread to the very dregs. He exhausted the limits of human pleasure. He drained the massive reservoirs of human intellect, and he stood entirely alone at the frozen peak of human supremacy, only to confirm the most terrifying theological truth in the ancient world. The fortress of God's logic cannot be breached. The cosmic ledger will not be balanced under the sun. The dead remain in the dark. The living are violently swept toward the precipice, and the heavy iron doors of divine providence remain bolted shut, silently demanding an absolute, terrifying surrender from anyone who dares to approach. The architecture of this terrifying surrender is not meant to paralyze humanity indefinitely. It serves as the ultimate, violent psychological preparation for the eschatological horizon. We are currently living deep within the darkest, most deceptive phase of this cosmic loop. To fully grasp the prophetic consequences of Ecclesiastes, we must understand how the ancient world measured the massive, invisible weight of time, and how the dark entities that govern the present age have weaponized our ignorance of the impending end. The ancient astronomers of Mesopotamia, operating in the sprawling, shadow-drenched temples of Babylon, tracked the heavens with a chilling, mathematical precision. They developed the concept of the Saros cycle, a period of exactly 223 synodic months, which allowed them to predict solar and lunar eclipses with terrifying accuracy. They observed the universe and concluded that time was an eternal, inescapable wheel, destined to endlessly repeat the same celestial traumas, the same political collapses, and the same agonizing human struggles forever. Qohelet, heavily educated in the deep wisdom of the East, acknowledged the crushing physical reality of this rotating cage. He confirmed that the wind blows to the north and turns to the south, and the water relentlessly returns to the sea. But he possessed a heavy, prophetic inheritance that the Babylonian stargazers completely lacked. He understood that the wheel of the universe was not eternal. It was merely a temporary, agonizing scaffolding, a grand, violently spinning centrifuge designed to separate the wheat from the chaff before the entire machine is ultimately, permanently unplugged. The modern world, however, operates under a catastrophic engineered delusion. We arrogantly believe that our glowing digital algorithms, our advanced medical breakthroughs, and our sprawling global supply chains have somehow broken us out of the primitive cycle of the ancient world. We assume we have transcended the curse of the vapor, but the unseen principalities, the dark, intelligent architects of the air, know the terrifying truth. They have not been defeated by our technology. They have simply weaponized the Hevel, the vapor of vanity, on a scale that ancient humanity could never have possibly comprehended. Our modern glowing screens and our obsession with digital permanence are the ultimate, horrifying manifestations of chasing the wind. We willingly pour billions of hours of our finite cognitive energy into virtual voids, aggressively building digital empires that do not actually exist, fighting phantom wars in the ether while our physical bodies slowly decay in isolated rooms. The demonic realm no longer needs to physically drag us into the fiery valleys of Gehenna to offer our children to ancient, bloodthirsty deities like Moloch. They simply anesthetize us with an infinite scrolling stream of meaningless data, blinding us to the massive, dark storm clouds of divine judgment that are currently gathering just beyond the horizon of human perception. This mass, global anesthesia was not an accident. It was explicitly predicted by the architects of the New Testament. The illusion of the perpetual loop is exactly what the Apostle Peter warned about when describing the spiritual warfare of the last days. In his second epistle, chapter 3, verse 4, he prophesies that a specific, terrifying psychological condition will heavily infect the human race right before the end. He states that scoffers will come in the last days, following their own evil desires, and they will mock the promise of divine intervention by using the exact, dark logic of the ancient world.
They will say, "Where is this coming he promised? Ever since our ancestors died, everything goes on as it has since the beginning of creation." These modern scoffers literally weaponize the fatalistic observations of Ecclesiastes against the Creator.
They look at the grinding, unbroken cycle of sunrises, political elections, economic collapses, and technological advancements, and they confidently conclude that the closed-loop system has been entirely abandoned, that the throne room of heaven is empty, and that the divine executioner is never actually going to arrive to settle the accounts. But the unseen realm is not empty, and the suffocating silence of the heavens is not the silence of divine absence. It is the terrifying, heavy silence of a celestial courtroom, meticulously gathering evidence. To understand the profound gravity of our present reality, we must look at the ancient apocalyptic texts that circulated fiercely during the Second Temple period. In the Book of Enoch, specifically in chapter 81, the ancient patriarch is taken up into the highest, terrifying realms of the heavens and commanded by the angelic hosts to read the tablets of heaven. In the ancient apocalyptic worldview, these are not metaphorical symbols or poetic ideas. These are massive, terrifying ledgers of cosmic surveillance. Enoch is shown that every single act of human vanity, every drop of innocent blood spilled in the dark, every corrupt transaction made in the shadows of power, and every cruel word whispered behind closed doors is being relentlessly recorded by angelic scribes. The universe is not simply repeating itself in a meaningless vacuum. The machine is heavily monitored, the data is being eternally preserved, and the system is hurtling toward a violent mathematical capacity. This brings us to the sudden, explosive prophetic climax of Qohelet's investigation. After 12 brutal chapters of entirely dismantling human ambition, exposing the corruption of the courts, and declaring the material world a decaying toxic vapor, he suddenly pivots. He drops a theological anchor that shatters the floor of the universe and fundamentally alters the entire landscape of eschatology. In the final verse of his ancient heavy scroll, Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 14, he delivers a warning that destroys any hope of escaping into the oblivion of the grave. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Focus entirely on the crushing weight of that phrase, every hidden thing. The text does not use a common Hebrew word for a simple secret kept between friends. It uses the ancient terrifying term, Nelam. This implies something that has been aggressively obscured, a reality deliberately buried deep under heavy layers of psychological deception. It refers to the dark, rotting anomalies of the human heart that we push so far down into our subconscious that even we forget they exist. It is the secret, venomous malice, meticulously disguised as righteous indignation. It is the cold, calculated exploitation hidden perfectly behind the warm mask of corporate philanthropy. It is the quiet, suffocating lust, festering safely behind the locked doors of the modern religious establishment. Nelam is the invisible dark matter of the human soul, the hidden spiritual rot that entirely fuels the machinery of a fallen world. Imagine the sheer, unimaginable terror of that impending moment of revelation. We spend our entire mortal lives desperately managing our public relations, applying thick, heavy layers of theological and social makeup to hide the horrifying decay underneath. We build our fragile identities entirely within the vapor, blindly assuming that the darkness of history and the silence of the grave will forever cover our tracks. But the prophetic warning of Ecclesiastes perfectly aligns with the catastrophic visions of the apocalypse. The closed-loop system under the sun is not just a prison, it is a meticulously wired interrogation room. And the day is rapidly approaching when the two-way mirror will be violently shattered. The cosmic architecture of final judgment, the great white throne detailed in the Book of Revelation, will abruptly descend into our dimension, and the searing, unendurable radiation of divine holiness will instantly vaporize the shadows.
Every single Nelam, every deeply buried secret of the human experience, will be violently dragged out into the blinding, terrifying light of absolute, uncompromising truth. This terrifying accounting directly connects to the most horrifying prophetic consequence of all, the reversal of Sheol.
We established earlier that Qohelet looked down into the dusty, silent pit of the grave and saw that the dead knew nothing, that their memory was erased, and their agonizing passions had permanently vanished. But the progressive revelation of biblical prophecy dictates that this dark paralysis is only temporary. The grave is merely a holding cell. In the book of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 2, the prophet shatters the absolute silence of the ancient cemetery, prophesying that multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will violently awake, some to everlasting life and others to shame and everlasting contempt. The dead will not be allowed to simply rest in the quiet, comforting oblivion they found under the sun. The earth will literally vomit out its dead. This means that the vanity we construct today, the dark deeds we commit in secret, and the spiritual apathy we cultivate in the modern world are not safely buried with our bones. They are actively waiting for us at the end of time, perfectly preserved in the tablets of heaven, ready to testify against us in a courtroom where the judge cannot be bribed, manipulated, or deceived. The ultimate prophetic conclusion of Ecclesiastes is that the boundaries of our reality are about to be violently dismantled. Throughout the entire text, the absolute limit of human frustration and despair is repeated ad nauseum with the phrase "under the sun." The sun is the great burning warden of our celestial prison, marking our rapidly decaying days, measuring out our exhausting labor, and silently watching us die generation after generation. It is the ultimate symbol of the closed, inescapable loop of natural law. But in the final, staggering chapters of the biblical canon, the Apostle John looks into the terrifying, magnificent architecture of the new, eternal reality and observes something that completely obliterates the ancient curse of Qohelet. In Revelation chapter 21, verse 23, John notes that the new holy city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp. The boundary of the sun is entirely permanently removed. The suffocating, burning ceiling of our cosmic cage is torn wide open, and the vapor is finally blown away by the breath of the Almighty. But the transition from the decaying, agonizing loop of the present world into that eternal, sunless reality is not a peaceful, gentle evolution. It requires the absolute, catastrophic destruction of everything built on the foundation of the Hevel. The intense spiritual warfare of our current age is a desperate, violent scramble by the dark principalities to ensure that when the eschatological fire finally falls, humanity is caught entirely entangled in the ashes of their meaningless, earthly empires. They want you exhausted. They want you obsessed with the temporary, screaming political theaters, the collapsing global financial markets, and the endless, vibrating anxieties of modern survival. They desperately want you to stare at the spinning gears of the machine until you are entirely hypnotized by the motion, completely oblivious to the fact that the massive, heavy blade of divine judgment is already swinging down with terrifying speed toward the very center of the wheel. To survive the impending collision with this divine blade, we must finally confront the terrifying singular conclusion of Qohelet's exhausting investigation. After meticulously dismantling every single pillar of human achievement, after proving that wealth is a vapor, that earthly justice is a corrupt illusion, and that the grave waits with a completely open and indifferent mouth, the wisest man of the ancient world reduces the entire meaning of human existence down to one agonizingly brief, unyielding command. In Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13, the scroll finally stops its relentless deconstruction and delivers the ultimate verdict. The end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. The modern religious establishment has done everything in its power to entirely neuter this final sentence. They have actively, systematically softened the ancient language, teaching congregations that to fear God merely means to possess a polite, respectful reverence, the kind of mild deference one might show to an elderly grandfather or a dignified civil judge. This is a catastrophic, lethal mistranslation of the ancient reality. The original Hebrew word used here is Yirah. It has absolutely nothing to do with polite respect. Yirah is a visceral, bone-rattling terror. It is the involuntary biological reaction of a fragile, mortal creature suddenly realizing it is standing completely exposed before an apex predator of infinite, incomprehensible power. It is the exact sensation of standing on the jagged edge of a massive, dark precipice, looking down into a bottomless abyss, and feeling the immense, heavy gravity actively pulling at your bones. When the ancient prophets experienced even a microscopic fraction of this presence, they did not feel a warm, comforting peace. They collapsed into the dirt like dead men, aggressively cursing their own existence, fully expecting to be instantly vaporized by the sheer radioactive holiness of the Creator. To fully understand the gravity of this fear, we must look directly at the terrifying architecture that Solomon himself engineered to house the presence of this God. When he constructed the first temple in Jerusalem, he utilized tens of thousands of workers to cut massive, blindingly white limestone blocks, overlaying the sprawling exterior courts with dazzling gold and bronze that reflected the blazing Middle Eastern sun. But the innermost chamber, the Devir, the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant actually rested, was designed with a chilling, deliberate anomaly. It was a perfect 20-cubit cube constructed entirely without windows. It was sealed off from the natural world by massive cedar doors and a heavy, impenetrable veil. According to the historical record in 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 12, when Solomon dedicated this monumental structure, he did not declare that God dwells in the light. He stated with terrifying theological precision, "The Lord has said that He would dwell in thick darkness." The ancient Hebrew word for this specific, suffocating darkness is Araphel. It is a heavy, storm-laden blackness, a dense, churning cloud that completely extinguishes human vision and entirely consumes all natural light. God deliberately positioned Himself inside a suffocating, pitch-black void at the very center of the Israelite Empire. The high priest who dared to cross into that chamber once a year on the Day of Atonement did not enter with a casual, joyful song. He entered in a state of absolute paralyzing Yirah, carrying the fresh, dripping blood of a slaughtered goat, moving through the thick smoke of burning incense, knowing that a single ritualistic error, a single arrogant thought in the presence of the Araphel, would result in his immediate, violent execution by the unseen forces inhabiting the dark. This is the God of Ecclesiastes. He is not a cosmic therapist waiting patiently to listen to your emotional grievances. He is not a celestial banker guaranteeing a return on your moral investments. He is the sovereign, unsearchable architect of a universe that is rapidly decaying, a consuming fire dwelling in the thick darkness, orchestrating a grand, terrifying design that you are biologically incapable of understanding. And the command to fear him is not a suggestion for a better life. It is the only rational, mathematically sound response to the reality of the cosmos. According to the deep esoteric traditions of the ancient rabbinic scholars, heavily detailed in Talmudic texts like Tractate Berakot, human beings live their entire mortal lives completely shielded by the Pargod. The Pargod is the massive cosmic curtain that separates our fragile, decaying, three-dimensional reality from the blinding, chaotic terror of the divine courtroom. We spend our brief, vaporous decades building our pathetic little sandcastles on the dark side of this veil. We accumulate our wealth. We fight our petty political wars. We fiercely debate our modern philosophies. And we arrogantly convince ourselves that we are the masters of the heavy machinery of time. We desperately ignore the terrifying reality that the Pargod is tissue thin, and at any given second, without warning, the cosmic wind can blow it aside. The end of the matter is not a warm reassurance of your personal value. The conclusion of the scroll offers absolutely no guarantee that your suffering will be explained in this lifetime, or that the wicked men who crushed you under their boots will face justice before you take your final breath. The universe will continue to grind its heavy iron teeth. The sun will rise completely indifferent to your tragedies. The wind will howl through the ruins of the cities you spent your entire life building. The terrifying reality is that you are a temporary ghost chained to a dying animal, marching relentlessly toward the exact same dusty, silent grave that swallowed the greatest emperors of antiquity. Your only duty, your sole anchor in the violent spinning centrifuge of this meaningless existence, is to drop entirely to your knees in the thick, suffocating darkness, to keep your mouth violently shut, and to tremble before the unsearchable majesty of the Creator. The cosmic clock is ticking. The vapor is rapidly dissolving into the freezing night air, and the heavy iron door of eternity is already beginning to swing open.